Thank you all for being here and celebrating the lives of these two sisters. We are going to share some of our memories of Laniece and Mary. I'm Laniece's youngest daughter, Linda, and these are my two daughters. This is Libby, and she will tell you about Laniece, who we called Mima, and this is Sarah, and she will talk about Aunt Mary. As you knew Mary, you knew that she had a quick wit, was comfortable being silly, and enjoyed being the brunt of her own joke. It may sound like all Mary's stories make fun of her, but it would give Mary great joy to tell you these stories, as she described herself as the nut on the family tree. I want you to imagine that Mary and Laniece are here to tell you some stories from their lives.
We had a wonderful childhood. We lived with our mom and dad and Nanny, our maternal grandmother, and our brother Bob, who was 8 years older. I was born in Nashville, and 18 months later, Mary was born in Atlanta. We were 1 year apart in school. We were raised as two peas in a pod, even though we had very different gifts and life experiences.
We moved around Tennessee and Georgia as our dad was transferred with Western Union Telegraph. We ended up in Florida, where we grew up in Bartow and then Orlando. We spent a lot of time outdoors, swimming in the ocean, lakes, and pools. Bob bought a boat and taught us how to water ski. After we left home, we returned to vacation at Daytona Beach and San Leandro Springs a lot.
We went to Orlando High School. The mascot is a tiger, and I was in the Bangaleres, which was the marching squad and drill team. I was not a particularly good student, but I graduated in 1949.
I graduated in 1950. I liked journalism, and I was on the staff of the school newspaper. I was a good student, but I did get a failing grade in home economics. I could not thread the sewing machine within the 60 seconds needed to pass.
So, the sisters spent the 1930s and 40s in the same house. Then they separated and started their adult lives pursuing new and completely different passions in the 1950s. Mary began her lifelong exercise of her independence, and Laniece began her lifelong exercise of taking care of those around her.
I was anxious to make my way in the world. I depended on my typing skills to seek employment as a secretary. Out of high school, I worked for the mayor of Orlando. I moved to Miami and lived with girlfriends that I kept in touch with for a lifetime. When I got bored, a friend and I planned to drive from Miami to California to seek new employment. But we stopped in Dallas and decided to stay. I worked for Texas Instruments.
I got married and moved to New Mexico, then Tennessee, then Michigan. I enjoyed being a homemaker, and I was good at it. I had 4 children. 3 of them were born by my 4th wedding anniversary, and the 4th was born 4 years later.
I got bored in Dallas and answered an ad in the paper for the secretary needed in Thailand with the U.S. State Department. I lived in Thailand for 2 years and traveled around the world before returning to Dallas in 1967. I stayed in Dallas for the next 50 years.
It's 1967, Mary is back in Dallas, and Laniece's family had moved from Michigan to Houston in 1966. The sisters are now in the same state in cities that are a 4-hour drive apart on I-45. Laniece stayed in Houston for the next 20 years.
I volunteered for all of the kids' activities. I taught Sunday school, drove carpool, was a room mom at school, and a Girl Scout brownie leader. Mary and I had been Girl Scouts, and our mother was the troop leader. I'm proud to say that all 3 of my granddaughters were Girl Scouts too.
I lived a single life in Dallas. I worked for the Bank of America in the tallest building in downtown. I was a secretary, later called an administrative assistant, and I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment for many years. I bought a town home at the very north side of town in the 1970s.
I grew up sewing my clothes. I enjoyed making clothes for my girls, and it was a lot less expensive than buying them. My son was jealous that I didn't make his clothes, so I made him some pajamas. When the girls were growing up, when they'd tell me about clothes they wanted to buy, I'd say, let's go find a pattern, and I would make it instead. I taught the girls to sew, and soon they made their own clothes.
I always liked to travel, whether it was with myself or my friends or family. I went to a lot of places, including Scotland, Africa, New Zealand, Canada, and Hawaii. I wasn't afraid of adventure. I just didn't worry about the details and whether or not things would work out okay. After my visit to the Taj Mahal, a man with his family advised me that I needed to act quickly in order to get one of the taxis, because we were on the last train, and after the taxis were filled, there wouldn't be any more coming. Well, we parted ways and things were hectic, and I tried to get a taxi, and I find myself still at the platform, and there were no more taxis.
Oh.
Within minutes, the man and his family reappeared in their taxi, insisting that I join them. So I had to sit on their laps in order to fit in the taxi. It was just part of the adventure.
I was a good Southern cook. I made dinner for my family of 6 most nights, and the amount of food on the table would have fed 10 to 12 people. Specialties were fried chicken, meatloaf, smothered steak, salmon croquettes, and liver and onions. I made scratch biscuits and brownies without a recipe. I made a lot of congealed Jell-O salads and a lot of Toll House chocolate chip cookies. An iconic family photo was in the slideshow. My 3 oldest kids with a bowl of cake batter, beaters, and a spatula. This was our life. I saved many birthday and Mother's Day cards from over the years, and there's a card that says, it's right here, a good mom lets you lick the beaters, a great mom turns off the mixer first. I received that card from 3 of my kids over the years, and in fact, I actually received 5 copies of it because 2 kids sent it more than once.
With Laniece's 4 kids in Houston, they'd get on the bus or on a Southwest plane one at a time and visit for a weekend. They got to be the center of attention, and I didn't have many rules. It was a big deal when each child grew taller than me, which they all did. We ate out because I didn't cook. When it was just me at home, I would open a can of something or heat something in the microwave. And usually I wouldn't eat all of it, so I would just put that same container back in the refrigerator. It seemed to bother Laniece, but I thought it was okay.
We usually had Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner at my house. I made all the food and frequently included a few extra neighbors or others with nowhere to be. Our parents frequently came from Orlando, and Mary drove down from Dallas to Houston. The year my oldest daughter married, we hosted 30 people and set up card tables all over the house, including a bedroom or 2.
We've established that I was not much of a cook, but I always wanted to contribute to holiday meals, so I was usually asked to bring a bottle of wine. One Thanksgiving, I made blueberry scones, except no one recognized them as scones and they asked me about them. I explained that I didn't have all the ingredients, so I just substituted with what I had, like using spreadable margarine in place of butter. They were fine.
A family classic recipe is a really rich chocolate pie. It's not chocolate pudding, it is more chocolate fudge. My family loved everything chocolate, and I made this dessert to impress guests. One night, 2 daughters had boyfriends at dinner. Neither young man was able to finish their piece of pie. It was too chocolatey for them.
Oh.
Even though my daughters felt like they wimped out on the chocolate pie, they both married into the family.
In 1986, Laniece was an empty nester, so she moved to Dallas and bought a townhome a few doors down from Mary's. Their mother had moved from Orlando to an apartment in Dallas 2 years earlier. Mary retired from the Bank of America, so the 3 of them were ready for their next stage of life adventures, all living in the same city. Friends ask why the 3 women didn't live together, and it was because they each managed their household differently. If you asked to borrow their mom's scissors, she would know exactly how many pairs she owned, where they were stored, and they would be there when you looked. If you asked about Laniece's scissors, she'd have a guess as to how many pairs she'd owned, and where they should be stored, and they may or may not be there when you looked. Mary would have no idea whether or not she owned any scissors. Also, Laniece's middle daughter lived in Dallas with her family that included the first 2 grandchildren. Ah, yes, grandchildren. Laniece blossomed in her new role as Mima. Observers may say that Laniece had children just to get to the grandchildren. She ended up with 3 grandsons, 3 granddaughters, and 5 great-grandchildren. She truly excelled as a grandmother.
I hosted my granddaughters from Houston for a full week of Camp Mima each summer in Dallas. They covered the walls with their artwork. I made underbaked brownies and other sweets since they inherited my sweet tooth. I took them to McDonald's to collect teeny beanie babies. We bought 3 candy bars for $1 at the Dollar Tree. They were always thrilled to be gifted Shackley makeup out of the boxes in my closets, the opportunity to help me reorganize, and for time playing solitaire or Minesweeper on my desktop computer. We did puzzles with my next door neighbor, and they loved spending time with the rotating menagerie of animals I was pet sitting. I was what they considered a cool grandma because I knew how to send emails. I left lipstick marks on their cheeks when we said goodbye. After camp was over, I was a great pen pal. I wrote often when they were away at other camps too, and I never forgot to send a card for all occasions.
I loved going to the movies, and I became a movie reviewer when I was in my 70s. I wrote reviews for a local newsletter and even had a press pass. This wasn't just a few reviews. There were hundreds. And I wasn't afraid to give my unvarnished opinion. In one review, I said, "Neither space nor good taste allows a detailed description of this movie." Sometimes I took my great nieces with me to see some of the kids' movies when they visited and let them make input on my reviews. They felt like celebrities getting to see movies like Recess and Pokemon before all of their friends, though the movies certainly weren't all winners.
I started quilting at the Richardson Senior Center in northern Dallas every week. Those quilters were some of my best friends. I quilted on my 1930s vintage Singer sewing machine. My oldest daughter was the most avid quilter in the family. My youngest daughter is also a quilter. When I moved to Georgetown into a one-bedroom apartment, I put all my quilting supplies in the bedroom and I slept in a reclining chair in my living room. Linda moved 2 entire SUV loads of quilting supplies when I moved out.
I liked hosting parties, and I had a nice back patio in Dallas. Linda's family was in town for Laniece's 85th birthday party, and I thought we should have the birthday meal at my house. There were 7 of us. But it wasn't until we were assembled on my patio that I realized I didn't even own 7 forks, plates, or chairs. Someone walked over to Laniece's to get what we needed.
In 2017, Laniece and Mary moved a final time to Georgetown, Texas, to be near me and Robert when we had retired. They moved into the newly constructed Wesleyan East building in apartments a few doors from each other. Mary continued in her quest to do all she could to maintain her independence, even as she moved to assisted living and to memory care. Laniece continued doing the one thing she knew best, taking care of the one she loved, and in this case, Mary.
Here's some actual diary entries that I wrote. The Wesleyan is a lovely retirement home. I call it Downton Abbey because of its elegance, but it's also comfortable and informal. We have many activities available, wonderful food, and lovely grounds. We live in apartments. Mine is a large 1-bedroom. Laniece chose a small 1-bedroom, and both suit us just fine. I played beanbag baseball today. I'm on the purple team this round. Terrible game for us. Lost big time. Tonight, Marie and I went to a movie, The Devil Wears Prada. Not very good and way too long.
I loved reading books. I read a few books every week. I liked reading thrillers like the Jack Reacher series. I also liked romances. I kept meticulous records on note cards of the books that I read, and I had a card for each author and another card for each year. Before I started a book, I would check my file system to see whether or not I had already read that one or not. I liked to keep a total of the books I read each year, and the total was always over 100 books.
I know the total number of books I read while living at the Wesleyan. 0. I preferred being out and about playing beanbag baseball. Since I didn't have a car after I moved to Georgetown, I had to rely on others to get my favorite food or beverage items. In particular, I got Linda and Robert to buy me the extra small 7-ounce beers. People would chuckle when the Wesleyan staff would ask us what we would like to drink at dinner time, and I would request a beer. However, Robert did stop by occasionally and share a beer with me.
I would be the first to admit I was not a talented singer, but it didn't mean I wasn't appreciative of other people's skills. I loved sharing a hymnal with Linda and her family when we were together in church. I'd even exclaim loudly mid-song how nice everyone's voice sounded, even if it happened to be during a rest in the music and everyone else could hear me, making my granddaughter blush. I loved watching family members perform solos or with the choir over the years. Sometimes they got very silly. Just last Christmas at church, the whole congregation rose to sing the Hallelujah chorus. I did not sing along. Linda was doing a pretty good job singing along and keeping up with the super fast tempo. Granddaughter Sarah was also singing along, but trying to do all of the parts, both men's and women's, as she and her sister had done growing up. The situation turned into hilarity and laughter. I was laughing so hard I was afraid I would lose my dentures.
I was diagnosed with dementia a few years after moving to Georgetown. It wasn't particularly obvious because I'd always been a bit quirky. One time, Linda took me to an appointment and noticed I had on 2 different shoes. Linda thought about it twice and then said, "Hey Mary, I see your shoes don't match." I replied without any hesitation, "I know, these are the first 2 shoes I found, and I knew you were picking me up soon, so I just wore these."
Mary lived life on her own terms, maintaining all the independence she could muster. Laniece spent her lifetime caring for her family and friends, and she accomplished her last wish of being there for Mary at the end of Mary's life. Laniece and Mary express gratitude often and love those around them deeply. We've been so blessed to be loved by them for so long, and I know that we'll all continue that legacy.
Oh, that's great.